Welcome everyone, welcome panelists, welcome those of you who have joined us today. I'm Siri Vaith, the Executive Director of the Cystic Fibrosis Research Institute, or CFRI, and it is such an honor and a pleasure for me to welcome you to what promises to be a very engaging conversation about navigating the new COVID normal post-transplant. The idea for this webinar came from during a discussion during CFRI's CF Adult Advisory Committee at a meeting in which we were lamenting that while rates of COVID at this time, and it's June 2022, are 6 times the rates they were at this time a year ago, and yet much of the world is acting as if we are through the pandemic, it's behind us. We certainly know as a CF community, and certainly the millions of people with underlying health conditions know that it is not over and that it is really hard to return to some kind of quote unquote normal, especially as all these COVID precautions have been rolled back. No longer, people aren't wearing masks. There's no need to show proof of vaccination, no need to have a negative test. And this is particularly true for people post-transplant whose immune systems are necessarily suppressed to prevent rejection. Before we get started with the conversation, I must, as always, say that nothing that we say today should be used as medical advice or diagnosis, and that before you make any changes to your health care plan, please check in with your physician and care team before doing so. I also want to thank our sponsors whose generous grants make this webinar possible. That includes Vertex Pharmaceuticals, Chiesi USA, Gilead Sciences, Genentech, and Viatris. We thank you. And so now, here comes the good part. Hello, panelists. We are joined today by 5 amazing people. Lisa Stackhouse, Elise Salkonen-Goldberg, Danielle Mandela, Willem Wary, and Missy Peterson. And these 5 individuals all have CF and all have received double lung transplants. And so they are very kindly here today to share their perspectives, their insights, their tips on how to navigate this new COVID normal. So before we dive into the conversation, let's go around and each of you introduce yourselves, and I'm just going to start on my screen. Lisa, why don't you kick it off?
Hi, I'm Lisa Stackhouse. I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at the age of 13, and I had my double lung transplant almost 7 years ago in October 2015, and I live in Minnesota. Elise.
Oh.
My name is Elise Salkonen-Goldberg. I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at 3 years old. I am 63 and a half years old now. I am almost 9 years post-transplant, and I had my transplant in 2013. And I'm happy to be here today.
Missy?
Hi, my name is Missy Peterson, and I was diagnosed with CF when I was 1.5. And I had my transplant 25 and a half years ago now in 1996. And I live in South Dakota.
Willem?
Hi, my name is Willem Wary. I was diagnosed at 8 years old. I am 62 years old now. Got my transplant when I was 59, so I'm 3 years and a couple of months post-transplant. And I got my transplant at University of Washington up in Seattle, but I live in Portland, Oregon, just outside of Portland, Oregon.
And Danielle. Danny.
My name is Danielle. You might know me as Danny. I work with CFRI. I was diagnosed with CF at 3 months old, and I got my double lung transplant living donor when I was 16 years old. So I'm almost 19 years post-transplant now, always looking to Missy for inspiration to hit that quarter-century mark.
Thank you all. And isn't it remarkable, just the length of time? And yes, Missy, you are a shining example of just the advances in transplant. So I'm just going to throw out a question. You all can go round robin as an open conversation. I, of course, have a list we may not get to all of them. And anybody who is tuned in and participating, feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will make sure to ask your questions of the panelists. So getting started, has your fear of catching COVID increased or decreased as of today versus the earlier days of the pandemic? Danny, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I would say that having a little bit more understanding of that we do about COVID and treatment and where it comes from and what it affects has eased my immediate concern about catching it. But I will definitely say I'm still very, very scared about the number of comorbidities that I have that would be affected by, even if COVID is no big deal and I get through that pretty quickly, the damage it'll do to the other parts of me that aren't already doing well, or any new long-term effects from COVID. I know there's a lot of long COVID things that sounds like they affect things that are already not going well for me as well. So catching it in the immediate and dying from it, I'm not quite as afraid of anymore, but all of the repercussions afterwards still really have me scared.
I want to second what Danny said about the long-term COVID effects. I would say that my journey through COVID is kind of like a roller coaster. My concern about it went really high initially, and it's just sort of gone up and down based on these different variants. The treatments available and our population being able to receive Evusheld has given me a little feeling of security and the fact that people are getting over this, but they are having long-term effects. And each new variant, as it's becoming less and less susceptible to the vaccines of non-transplant patients, so they're getting COVID, it's a constant concern. I will say I'm definitely, though, more relaxed and doing a bit more now than I was initially.
I can jump in here. So I agree, Elise, that it has definitely been a roller coaster, right? And while my anxiety at the beginning was very high, now it's kind of a little bit less, but largely to some of the points that both of you have made, which is that we know so much more than when the pandemic started. And we have, treatments like Evusheld and the antibodies and things like that. So we have treatments and things to deal with, even for those of us that are immune suppressed. So that, helps reduce the anxiety. And then you have all the variants, and then you have all the different, as the different restrictions are coming off, and people are just, no longer wearing masks in places where we were wearing masks. That has then increased the risk profile, if you will. And therefore, kind of in the end, I'm kind of like almost neutral, but so there's a bunch of pluses and a few negatives. And so have I become more concerned? Not a whole lot more than when the pandemic started. I'm definitely less than when we first started. And I'm like Elise said, doing a lot more now with Evusheld on board. So yeah, being careful. I never go anywhere public without a mask on, except for if I'm outside. If outside, then the game changes for me mentally, and the rules are very different. And I have the other thing is I have a caregiver, my wife, who has been with me through thick and thin. And so she's the one who tries to limit her exposure, but when she is like going grocery shopping, things like that, I don't do any of that anymore. She does all of that, and she does that in a very careful, protected type situation so that when she comes home, she knows not to expose me. So anyway, there's a handful of stuff.
I think I have a lot to echo back what everyone else has said. I feel less fear of getting COVID. But, it depends on the situation, actually. If I'm around children, that may heighten my fear because they're not able to be vaccinated. And why it's maybe a little less is because there is a vaccination out for everyone else, the non-transplant population, even though I know they can get COVID, but at least they have a treatment now where there wasn't one before. And for a plane now, for instance, now with people coming from another country, they don't have to test negative to get on. So I'm like wondering if I should have flown before when there was masks and all of that safety precautions in place, and now it seems a little less. So it's kind of by situation. And my husband too has, like Willem has been being just as careful. He's almost like in it with me, or he is in it with me, and doing as much, least as possible to infect me.
So I feel similar to Danny. And I think she and I are in some of the similar situations with our comorbidities that we have. I'm not as afraid of catching it anymore either, as I am of what is going to happen to me afterwards and long-term, like with my kidney issues and my blood pressure and whatnot. And I think a lot of people forget about the long haul COVID that are out there not masked and saying that it's just a cold and whatnot. And they forget that those of us who are immune suppressed, who have all these comorbidities, or people who don't them, could end up with longer term issues that they have to throw more meds at. My list is already 20 pills long or longer, and I don't want to throw any more at that. So that's what scares me about catching COVID now. My fear is less, but the fear of the long-term effects is greater. And then as to the treatments, yes, there are treatments for us, but I have a lot of folks say, well, if you catch it, you can just take Paxlovid. Well, a lot of people don't understand that people who are immune suppressed cannot, that are on certain anti-rejection drugs, cannot take Paxlovid, and unless their doctor approves it, which most of them are not because of the interactions with it. So we are limited with some of the treatments as well.
Yeah, I would just add to that some of my fear and anxiety has now turned more to frustration because at the beginning of this, before the pandemic, we were taking all these precautions ourselves already. And that was part of the treatment plan post-transplant. We signed on to it knowing that most of the world doesn't understand these things. So it's our responsibility. Post-pandemic and where we're at now, it's frustrating because it feels like there has been a lot of education. And at the start, people understood and they were helping us comply to keep everybody safe. But it feels like we're losing that really quickly. And so now it feels like, yes, we understand your needs and we're still not going to help you out. And it's not a great feeling. It's really hard on morale for sure.
Absolutely. It is amazing. I mean, right before this all started, the Adult Advisory Committee did these great podcasts on, ending handshaking. And it's just amazing to see. We're sort of almost right back where we were. I thought things would change, but they have not. So in light of that, obviously everything in life is, but especially for people post-transplant, is a balancing of risk and reward. And how do each of you balance those two to have enough rewards for quality of life while navigating the risks? Elise, you want to start?
Sure. My new motto that I think my family is, if I could get a tattoo, I would. It's calculated risk. And I also think it's a combination of that and things that I really want to do. For example, I have attended a couple weddings. I will say that I feel as if my life is a little bit like watching a television show, that I'm viewing it from the outside as an observer, not so much as a participant, but I'm willing to accept that level of participation to not be totally excluded. I'm fortunate where I live. I do live in California, and there is a high vaccination rate, and people are, my friend group is very considerate in terms of social situations. They will volunteer to get tested before we do only outside gatherings. But I have started, I can't believe that going to the supermarket has become an entertainment for me, but it has. I've taken over some of the things that my husband did all of for almost a year. And I'm just doing it safely. I go and truly believe that these KN95s and N95s are our best friends. I have not gotten on an airplane since the mask mandate is off, but trying to make there's this balance between that. I think we all who are here and those of us viewing, we know what life was like before, and we don't want to experience that feeling of being air starved. Yet we also want to live because we have these wonderful lungs, and I'm able to do things now that I probably couldn't do since I was in high school. And it's truly a balance of safety. But outdoors, like Willem, I rarely wear a mask other than perhaps maybe for some sun protection. And, of course, my neighbors tell me I don't need it outside. It's not really their business. But I think you have to do what your comfort level is. And I'm very grateful that my family and friends are all vaccinated. It's really helped.
So I can talk a little bit about some of my risk reward, and we've been talking about airlines. So that's been a real balance, or a challenge for me, right? I know the airlines are high risk, but that's also one of my high rewards is my granddaughters all live unfortunately, I'm in Oregon, they're in Hawaii. So not a bad place to have to go to, but it's a 6-hour flight. Luckily, there are direct flights from my airport to where they are, so that helps. But during the course of the pandemic, I've now taken the plane 2 times. Once right when Delta was just coming down and everybody thought things were getting better and we're over the hump. And then once a few months ago when we thought everything was getting better and over the hump number 2. So that's a risk I was willing to take to go see the granddaughters. My wife has traveled a couple times in addition to that, but we take lots of precautions when we get on the plane, before we get on the plane, right? N95 for sure. We also wear a face mask, and she is, I don't know, she's just super diligent about cleaning the whole seat back, tray table, everything, anything that I'm going to touch. She's got alcohol wipes and cleaning everything. And so again, just it's the balance of, the reward of getting to Hawaii and seeing my granddaughters is huge. And therefore taking the risk of getting on an airplane to see them is something I'm willing to do and take all the precautions possible. And I haven't gone anyplace else other than to see them. Yeah, so a face mask and a face shield.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Willem, I was gonna say, I know you showed us last week at a different meeting, you have a cabana, and that's where your wife goes when she goes on her own. She has a place to go to for 10 days to retreat.
Yeah, we have a small building outside, which is completely separate on its own. And when she has traveled during higher risk periods and I stayed home, she went and then like Lisa said, she quarantined in what we call the cabana. And and our deal was, like last thing was like 3 days after she got back, she would test PCR. And on her second PCR test, then she was allowed to elevate herself back to main house status. And that typically was, I think the earliest was day 8. And then I think the first time she went, she was down there for 10 days. But anyway, so that's, again, taking the precautions, and she's careful. And so she's taking a little bit higher risk, but then we make sure I don't get any kind of COVID infections.
Yeah, similar to kind of both of you so far. I triage, I guess, what the reward is for various different activities. And a lot like Willem, for me, at the very top of the list is family and friends and relationships and things like that. I'm very fortunate that pretty much everybody in my close circle, close to my heart, is in California. I don't have to fly anywhere. I do very much miss travel for my own fun. And I'm a music festival hippie. Like, I haven't been doing that for a few years. But I do have in my circle, one of my best friends has a young son who is almost 2 years old. And I have been pretty much no contact with everybody. I haven't been hugging, maybe elbow bumps here and there, but minimal physical contact except for this toddler, because he gives the best hugs in the world. And there just has to be, for me, it's that mental health balance. There has to be some kind of release of that energy and just human contact. And so, yes, it's a toddler, but it's my one risk that I take, and I do it carefully. And his mom, same thing, is very up on the precautions. She won't even let me near him if they've had a sniffle in the last week. Like, she's very aware of his situation, her situation, before I get to them. So like Elise said, I'm very fortunate that my circle understands what's going on. They're all vaccinated. And where I live in California, even for California standards, the area that I live in, pretty much everybody is still voluntarily masking and taking care of each other. So I do feel very lucky where I'm at.
And for me, you know, I take advantage of, I live in Minnesota, and so I take advantage of the spring, summer, mainly summer, fall months where I can be outdoors with my family, because I do have family members that are not vaccinated. And so, you know, I do stay, you know, far away from them if we're outdoors in gathering. We don't go inside. So, you know, that's how I want to see my family. I don't get to see them for the holidays because not everyone's vaccinated and they don't practice safety. So, so I just, you know, it's my husband and I, we have a good time with our holidays.
You can't do your holidays outside in Minnesota in December?
No, it's not a little too cold when it's the negative windshield. So I wish. So
what about via like Zoom? I know that we were doing some holidays, Thanksgiving, when the first Thanksgiving, my family lives in Southern California. We started out the meal together and just kind of checked in and then went our separate ways. But that's one thing I'm very grateful for, is I can't imagine having gone through these last 3 years and plus without Zoom and streaming.
That is very true. Yeah. Well, we moved here to South Dakota to be closer to family, and that was where I had to find a balance because I wanted to see my niece and nephew, who are teenagers who I didn't expect to ever grow old to see. And my nephew played basketball and he plays baseball now, and my niece is in plays. And for the first few months I was here, she was in a couple, and I was like, I can't go. And then I thought, you know, you've got to see her in a couple. And because maybe she's not going to do this next year or something. And she's really good. And so I put my N95 on, I put another mask on over that, brought my hand sanitizer, you know, tried to sit like, and I couldn't really sit far away from people, but like in between my family members that I knew were safe. But it was hard because I was literally most times the only one masked. And that was really hard. And thankfully I came out of there without ever catching COVID. But the baseball games were nice because I was outside. I could stand far away. We always sat at the back picnic table, and it was great to be able to see him play baseball. So I kind of have to pick and choose, kind of like Debbie says, you know, with her friend's little 2-year-old. And I have to decide, is it worth the risk or not worth the risk? And to see my niece and nephew, I felt like it was worth the risk. And they know if they've got a sniffle or they're sick or they don't feel good, they can't be around me. And the minute that happens, they tell me, which is nice. But so that's kind of what I do.
It's interesting too, to your point, Missy, of being the only one wearing a mask sometimes, because again, we've been familiar with that feeling since we got our transplants before the pandemic. We were wearing masks where other people weren't. And for me personally, I used to be met with compassion and looks of like, oh, you're sick too. I had a relative, this and that. I get it. To now, if someone sees me wearing it and it's immediately, you don't need to be doing that. You got the wrong information. You're a sheep, whatever. It's like nothing has changed for us. We're doing the same thing we've always been doing. It's just the attitudes towards us that are changing.
Yeah, and I used to feel embarrassed to wear a mask. And then when everybody started wearing them, I was like, this is fantastic. And now I'm back to, I'm not embarrassed now. Now I'm more like, you want to say something to me? Come say something. Like I might have a not nice comment for you, which is terrible. But like, I mean, yeah, kind of an I dare you, but I'm still wearing it everywhere. I double mask, which I don't know if I necessarily need to, but I do. And I mean, everywhere I go, if I have to go places. And so, and I'm like, at this point, I'm kind of like, I don't care what people have to say to me, but it's just sad that they can't realize and don't understand. I want more people to understand. There are still those of us who have no choice but to mask if we don't want to catch this. So just remember when you're at a store, if you're at a store, you see somebody in a mask, they may not be doing it because they're healthy and they're afraid of catching COVID, but that's okay too. I mean, but they might be immune suppressed like us, have a lot of issues, and they don't want to catch it. So just be kind and gentle and don't go up to them and be confrontational.
And it doesn't also, go ahead.
It's a great point too, that it's not just us. Lung transplant is a very small portion. We are highly susceptible to catching it, but we are not the only ones. And it's not visible on everybody when you see them to know whether or not they're immunocompromised and what their reasons are.
And as CF, not visible diseases is
exactly
common.
Yeah. So there's, like Missy said, just be kind. There's no reason. It's not harming you for me to wear a mask. If anything, it's doing you a favor.
Right. I just wanted to add too that there was a point where once people were vaccinated, they didn't have to mask anymore. Well, then when people continued to mask, it kind of maybe shed a light that we weren't willing to get the vaccine, even though we were vaccinated and it wasn't working. You kind of got the look maybe that, oh, you're afraid to get the vaccine. So that's not the case either. Right? Just need to be kind to anybody that's wearing a mask. You do not know their history and what they are dealing with day in and day out.
Of course, I'm showing my cynicism when I say that when they made those rules about if you're not vaccinated, please wear a mask. I'm like, if you're not vaccinated, you're probably less likely to wear a mask. So that was no reassurance to me. And I will say, now, of course, I have a daughter with CF, but I still wear a mask. And, I really do want to say to people, this is my gift to you, because I don't know when I've been exposed. And unless I'm wearing a really well-fitted N95, but if I'm wearing my little surgical mask, as I usually do, I'm protecting the world. I'm really not protected. So it just is so ironic. And it's, how COVID became politicized, that people would actually have an attitude about somebody who's doing them the favor. And as we see now with all the rollbacks, how many people have flu and the colds, and everything's going around again because we're not holding it in. So, and I do want to actually just say thank you, Hannah, for your amazing commentary and just the perspectives from Wisconsin. Thank you for sharing that with us. And so this is all related. I'm gonna mush two questions that I had together about navigating family issues or friend issues related to infection control, everything from the hand washing to the mask to the vaccine to the boosters. And do any of you feel comfortable? Like, do you ask people, are you vaccinated? Will you test before we get together, etc.? So I'd love to hear all of your strategies. Willem, jump. Oh, sorry, Danny. You go.
I can go first.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, yeah. So I want to jump on our previous topic real quick, and then so one of the comments, I think Elise mentioned Zoom. Anyway, that's one of the things with family and friends, right? Particularly with friends and friend groups. I have two groups that, because of the pandemic, they moved everything to Zoom. I don't know if it's ever going to change back, but that has made it really actually better, where I was really getting uncomfortable, or I didn't go to some of these breakfast meetings that we had with coworkers. And now I get to be fully participating again because of Zoom. So so there's that. As far as so I have no problem, particularly Kathy, if we have anybody over, making sure people and asking them, friends, are you vaccinated? And so that's pretty straightforward question for us. My situation is from a family perspective. I talked about going to Hawaii to go see my granddaughters. My daughter-in-law is not vaccinated. So that's always a challenge. But on the flip side, she is very sensitive to me when I come visit. So they do very much quarantine. She homeschools the kids, so they have very minimal exposure, and they're younger. But they try to quarantine for a couple of weeks before I arrived. They do home tests before I get there. So while they're not vaxxed, which would be much better, they at least have the concern level. So I don't have to deal with somebody who doesn't care. It's like, it's your problem, you deal with it. So I do have that going for me, but I do have to be very careful. And she knows we're very sensitive, and we've had some, when vaccinations became available, had some difficult discussions with them. And once we got to the point where like, okay, she's not going to change her mind and we're not going to change our mind. But for us, we said it's not worth breaking the relationship with our daughter-in-law, who, she controls the time of the granddaughters. So she's got the balls in her court. But anyway, she is very sensitive. And so there, it's kind of, that's the compromise we've kind of gotten to from a family perspective. And friends, it's either outside. I ask all the time, are you vaccinated? So that's, and I have no problem asking, kind of like Missy, if I'm in a store, or not in a store, because I don't go to the stores, but I'll be wearing a mask. If somebody wants to ask me why, I have no problem telling them why I have a mask. Matter of fact, kind of to the opposite. When I go on my walks, if I go on a walk and somebody's smoking, I actually challenge them and say, I usually try, and I try to be nice, right? But smoking's not good for you. And every now and then I get a response, and you can create a conversation out of that. So that's my 2 cents.
I would say my family situation is pretty similar. There are definitely people who, at first it was sort of, we were all learning and people weren't sure, but then people made their definitive choices not to get a vaccine, and discussions kind of ended at that point. And that was really, really hard for me to get past, but I sort of eventually, once I let all my emotions pass, reached that same conclusion of, if I cut everybody that disagrees with this out of my life, I'm going to be really lonely and have no community or family left. So, not none. I mean, there's plenty, but it was hard, but I had to make that choice of not letting it ruin the relationship completely. And same as you, people even who disagree with me are respectful of what I need. So basically, I just set my ground rules. Everybody's pretty aware of what my limitations are. So I'll be there or I won't. That's up to you and how you make your event. You know what I need. And so far, for the most part, people have accommodated, or I can say, if they tried to accommodate and something was missing, I feel totally comfortable saying, hey, I need this and this before I can come. My friend group, they are all as concerned about themselves and their families as I am about me. So that has not been a problem at all. I've never had to ask anyone if they were vaccinated. They all offer it up. If they invite a new person to something outdoors, they tell me whether they're vaccinated or not. So I think, I don't know if I just hit the right age demographic at the right time, but we're all on the same page pretty much.
Yeah. So, I've got a little bit of a different situation. I live with my parents who are almost 80. And, during the first couple of years of the pandemic, they were very careful. We all wore the masks. My mom did the grocery shopping. If we didn't order in, we ordered in for quite a while. And otherwise, she would go to the store, wear her mask, do the shopping as early in the morning and all that kind of stuff. And our friends were all very supportive and whatnot. And then as time kind of went on, we had some of those friends who were not as supportive and, oh, we're still wearing the mask, or we're still doing that. And that got really frustrating because they would say it right in front of me. And like, I couldn't hear them. And that was very hurtful because it was like, well, do you not care about, I mean, I know you care about me. I know you love me. You say that, but so that was frustrating. But living with my folks, so, after we moved, I didn't want to restrict their lives, and it got harder to try to say, could you please wear a mask? Could you please wash your hands? Could you please do this? And it was almost more stressful to do all that than to not do it. And I just had to take and do whatever I could do best to protect myself, knowing that they were going out and possibly getting exposed to it. Now, they've both been vaccinated. My mom actually is also immune suppressed, so she was fortunate enough to get the EvuShield as well, which was nice. So I've also had the EvuShield, and it's one of those things where I feel like I'm playing COVID roulette. And so, but my situation is I can't live on my own right now. I can't afford to live on my own. It's very hard. So I live with my folks who are very supportive of me and help me out a great deal. I want them to go out there and live their life. They're almost 80. I don't want to restrict them anymore. And so it's a hard balance. And if I could live on my own, I would. That way I could restrict who came to my house and whatnot. But I just feel like I can't do that. So I'm sure there's other people out there who live with their folks in my situation. And I just want you to know, look, you're not alone. And I do feel like once I kind of stopped doing a lot of that stuff, the stress was lifted a little bit, and that helped my anxiety and that helped my fear a little bit, which is interesting. I mean, like I said, we've talked about earlier, I'm still afraid to catch it in the long-term effects, but I don't know. It helped a little bit to not be so like wanting to shake them and just be like, do this or do that. But I have all my friends, I know most of my friends are vaccinated, so I haven't had to ask them that in a long time. And I do have some family friends back in Colorado, for example. If we stay with them, they test before we get there. And I've never asked them to do that. And they always do, because they want to make sure they don't have COVID before I come stay with them. So that's, there are those, it's far and few between, but there are some which really makes me happy.
So to follow up on what Missy was saying, that she realizes it's more stressful to be kind of bemoaning what people do and don't do. I think what we all kind of have learning to realize is the only people we really can control are ourselves. And that's something that's given me a great peace of mind. I know I come back from the market, I wash my hands. I know whatever I'm doing, I'm taking care of myself. But the one thing that I find astonishing, so like Danny, I do have some family members who are not vaccinated. My dad, who's 90, had a very big 90th birthday party. And this was in November. It used to be when big events were being held, people were asking on wedding invitations or birthdays to submit your vaccine records. That seems to have gone down by the wayside, because several of my family members, they knew they couldn't attend. They called my dad and said, we know the circumstances. And of course, it's all about me, which I don't really like, because there were a lot of other senior citizens at this party. But not only at that point in time did they send their vaccine records, but my dad at the last minute asked for everybody to, in good faith, get PCR tests. And things like that. We have tools we can use to give us a peace of mind. I'm not going to say everybody's COVID is picked up on those home tests, which you can only be so anxious all the time. But to ask people, and if they don't want to accommodate you, I'm not really sure if they're loving family and wonderful friends, because that if it was reciprocated, you would be the first one to volunteer that. So I think that for myself, I have created a lot of boundaries and learned people that are probably forever going to be in that friend circle, and people that I'm not socializing with as much because of their lifestyle. And people now are traveling so much that they're all coming back. And I think it's perfectly appropriate to say, if a friend group is getting together and 2 people have been in Europe or wherever, I'm going to sit out this week. I don't expect them to not come, but I can control who I'm around and what I do. And I would say that's happening more and more right now, because people are jumping on airplanes and attending, going into indoor restaurants and all these things that I'm not sure how many of us are doing. But I think if we really think that we can control our own environment and just give ourselves some peace of mind, because otherwise we're going to drive ourselves crazy and feel really, really depressed and isolated.
So Elise, just kind of to your point on PCR tests, I'll just share a quick story. I have a cousin in Holland. I have a Dutch heritage, and she was planning to come visit us and stay in our separate little building that we have on the side. So that would be safe. But when months of planning for her on this trip to the United States, one of the ground rules was, you need the PCR test before you come here. And so it was about a week before she was supposed to travel. And she goes, well, I've tested and I've tested negative. Like, great. Was that a PCR test? No, that was a antibody home test. Like, well, no, the agreement was PCR test. So she goes, well, I'll see what I can do about getting a PCR test. So now we're like 48 hours before she gets on the plane. And have you PCR test yet? Well, not yet, but I'm hoping to get one tomorrow. We've been, all these scheduling issues, like, okay, the ground rule was PCR test. So the day before, 24 hours before her flight, she finally gets a PCR test and the results come in. She's positive. Boy, were we, it was big, big, big upset for her, right? Because she's been planning a trip to the United States for months. But we had a general agreement, like, that's a no. You're not traveling because that's bad for the people on the plane, let alone traveling and being at my house, even though it's in a separate building. So the importance of a PCR test, that's the conclusion of that little story, just to jump on that.
I wanted to address Hannah's comment in the chat as well about whether or not it's legal to ask people's health status. From my understanding in California, and I think it's federal, the only people who are not allowed to ask are authorities. So government agencies, civil service like police and things like that, and employers asking their employees. Individuals can ask each other anything. They don't have to answer, but you are allowed to ask. And you're absolutely allowed to not let people into your home if they're not meeting your requirements.
Lisa, did you want to add anything on? I told everybody time was going to be flying. We could talk all day. So there's one thing, maybe we do a quick round robin. Throughout the conversation, you've all shared wonderful tips about staying safe as you navigate the new COVID normal. If there's anything you did not mention that you want to share that you do that helps you feel safe, let's do that. We'll go around. So let's see, Lisa, do you want to start off?
I'm going back to the outdoors. Like, I love outdoor patio seating now. I don't care really how hot it is. I can be outside and I can, eat in a restaurant, because I haven't eaten inside a restaurant since the pandemic started. So it's the outdoor patio seating. And, I'm just really happy. I mean, the silver lining is I've gotten to know so many more people because of additional group, things that had to go Zoom. They couldn't be done in person, especially like with the retreats here at CFRI. They're online. And so now, I can participate. We can all participate more and get to meet more people. So, yeah, I'm thankful for Zoom and for the outdoors.
Like Lisa, I also am very grateful for the outdoors. I decided from probably the first day of COVID that I wasn't going to give up hiking and walking with social distancing with friends. And I really wanted to learn something new during COVID, and I took up pickleball, and it is bringing me so much joy that I feel if I get COVID playing pickleball, so be it. I can't live in this COVID jail any longer. I'm careful, the minute I'm done, I Purell my hands, I wash them when I get home. But I'm I still, like all of us, have the cough and sneeze radar. If somebody is playing that I hear anything, I go the opposite way. But I think it's nice to use this time to learn how to do new things. The joke in our family is I don't think I've made the same meal for 3 years, because I feel that cooking is my creative outlet, but it's a challenge, and it's something, it's kind of like a goal of my creativity. I'm not going to say that we haven't all gained a little bit of weight, but so be it.
I would say, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna jump in. I mean, very much like Lisa and Elise. I mean, for me, being outside and in Oregon, that means that in the wintertime, I'm getting really wet. And in the summer times, I'm finally getting warm and hot. But I try to get outside every day. That's really, you know, and going on walks outside, fresh air, clear my mind, whether it's with Kathy, sometimes she joins me, sometimes she doesn't. It's just getting outside, and also, you know, Zoom, right? All these people that I've met because, or reconnected with because of Zoom, right? Has also been a pleasure, a joy during the times of COVID.
And I'll say that was going to be my last question, was what has brought you joy, or what brings you joy since the pandemic starts? So this is wonderful. Thank you for merging those. So Lisa, if you wanted to address that as well before, is any new things you've taken up since?
Yeah, you know, I've gotten involved in more volunteering that can be done online, and I joined a board, and we're in the process of rebranding the name. So I am trying to learn how to build a website. And so, and I've been in IT for over 20 some years. So it's been nice to, been on behind the scenes, but now trying to build it, you know. And so, you know, I think the volunteering and helping others has been a really good part of it. That's what I really enjoy, is helping others. So.
Yeah, so the Zoom calls have definitely helped during COVID for me. I used to be a volunteer at an animal shelter back home where I moved from, and had to stop that. And I was there for 10 plus years before COVID started. And so I thought, what am I going to do to keep myself busy during COVID? And CFRI, the wonderful organization that it is, has all these wonderful support groups. They had a COVID support group that was going on. And I've become involved in a lot of the support groups, and I'm on an advocacy board and whatnot. And then I've gotten to back to the outdoors now that it's nice out again. And I have my dog, and luckily she's kept me very, very busy. So, you know, I'm slowly but surely trying to get back to some of the stuff that I was doing before COVID. But it's a process.
Yeah, well, first, again, with Hannah in the chat, I'm loving her input here. Something that's making me feel safe also is just being in very close touch with my transplant team. From pretty early on, I decided I'm going to trust them over most other things for their guidance over the news and over whatever else. They're going to tell me what I need to do. So they made me feel safer by giving me realistic standards of, for example, if I wear my N95 at this point in the pandemic, 10 to 15 minutes indoors to run into the grocery store and get a couple things, they said that's probably okay. Don't freak out too much about something like that. So guidance from them has helped me a lot. And learning, I got a lot of practice with boundary setting so far, which was something I struggled with before. And this has just solidified it for me that I know how to use and enforce my boundaries properly. And then something that's bringing me joy is that I guess I'm kind of refocusing on my own mental health awareness. And with the money that I'm saving from not being out at restaurants and socializing at bars and stuff like that, I have all this money to take little weekend trips out to the coast where the air is fresh, because I live in Sacramento where we're on fire most of the summer. So getting outdoors and taking that walk is not always possible. So that's another layer of cabin fever. But with this money I'm saving, I can go out and camp, getting more use out of my camping equipment that I invested in, just going out to the coast to get some fresh air. So that's definitely been a joy.
Well, what brings me joy is knowing all of you. And I am so grateful to each of you for sharing your experiences and just speaking so frankly about how you've managed to navigate this incredible crazy world we are still living in. And I thank those people who have been with us today and watching, and to those on Facebook who watched the live stream. This is being recorded and will be released in the very near future as a podcast. So thanks to all for sharing that with others that you think would enjoy this. So Elise, Willem, Missy, Lisa, Danny, we are all very, very grateful to you. Thank you so much.